Sean Payton to the Houston Texans would have been the biggest nightmare possible. There's a lot of what ifs when it comes to this Houston Texans team. That would have been a nightmare. Let's talk about why. Let's talk about him versus DeMeco Ryans. Let's relive the offseason drama. And let's talk about why Sean Payton, even in New Orleans, is overrated. Let's go inside the locker room.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the locker room on YouTube. You know what it is. Let's get it. Hey.
Sean Payton as the Houston Texans head coaching hire would have been the biggest nightmare possible. We talk a lot about Bryce Young. We talk a lot about CJ Stroud. But Sean Payton would have been the biggest nightmare decision that Cal McNair, Hannah McNair, Nick Caserio could have made. It is the locker room, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 Central, Sports Radio 610 and the Odyssey app. Going to have an exclusive interview with the Texans player straight off of the practice field tomorrow. So right along on the Odyssey app for that. But I want to talk about this Sean Payton thing. The offseason of Sean Payton. It was obvious he wanted to get back into coaching. He never took the broadcast thing serious. He was half-assing it. He was half asleep in the Fox studio. Don't even know why they had him in there. And it was clear he wanted to get back into coaching. I think if you asked him behind closed doors, if you listen to what guys were saying, in his perfect dream world, he would have ended up replacing Staley with the Chargers or Mike McCarthy with the Dallas Cowboys. However, he used Colin Cowherd at Fox Sports to put out all these smoke screens, interviews, etc., including his interview with the Houston Texans, in which Sean Payton, when he was with Colin, talked about how great the Texans' job was. And then once he interviewed, Colin was saying stuff the night after the interview about the Texans, about ownership, etc. It even got to the point where it didn't even appear he was Denver's top choice. Denver, they pursued Jim Harbaugh. That ended up falling apart. And even at the last second, when it came down to Sean Payton versus DeMeco Ryans, the Denver Broncos, according to multiple credible reports, were trying to get DeMeco Ryans at the last minute, which would have been the right decision, and it would have been a better hire than him. As a matter of fact, I think there's a few other hires that the Denver Broncos could have made that would have been better off. Shane Steichen with the Colts would have been a better hire than Sean Payton. And there's a number of reasons for this. And draft compensation is a big reason for me, but even without draft compensation, I still think you could do better than Sean Payton. I'll get into why in a sec. Be sure to subscribe, like, right along. If you disagree, if you agree, put it in the comments. But we do have to at least acknowledge that Denver themselves, it appeared that they settled for Sean Payton. They wanted Jim Harbaugh, and then they wanted DeMeco Ryans. So they settled for Sean Payton. And when I say settle, they got maybe their third choice, and they paid a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick for a coach who is 60 years old, about to be 60 years old, who quit on a team in New Orleans, and who, when you break down his resume, you can kind of wonder, like, is this guy really as great as people make him out to be? We talk a lot about the Will Anderson trade, and the jury's still out on that, but they basically made the Will Anderson trade for Sean Payton, a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a third-round pick for a 60-year-old coach who's quit and whose best days are clearly behind him. Now, I will give the Denver Broncos credit, and this is what a lot of the Sean Payton apologists will say. Oh, they're 6-5. You know, they were awful last year. They've won 5 straight games. Okay, so we're just completely dismissing the fact that they started out 1-5. Like, does he have nothing to do with that? They're 6-5 right now. This Denver football team, they were not as bad as their record was last year. They had more talent on their roster than the record showed. It's like when Bill O'Brien took over the Texans and they won 9 games, and Bill O'Brien says, you know, we increased the win total from here. Yeah, you did, but it was a perfect storm the year before, and everybody knows that Gary Kubiak was a better coach than you. Now, Sean Payton's not a worse coach than Nathaniel Hackett. Nathaniel Hackett's one of the worst coaches that we've ever seen. So Sean Payton's in the perfect situation, and he's following up the perfect guy to where he's going to look good no matter what. They're going to improve no matter what. The biggest difference for the Broncos this year is their points per game. They're up about 6 points per game. All the yardage totals, all that stuff, it's around the same. Defensively, they're actually worse, although I will be fair and acknowledge that when you have that one bad game against the Dolphins where you allow 70, your defensive numbers could be somewhat skewed. So even me being the Sean Payton hater, I can acknowledge that. But that's the biggest difference is the points per game. They're 6-5. They've won 6 straight. 6-5 with that roster. This is not a rebuilding team. This was a team that was supposed to compete last year. They were supposed to compete. They traded a hell of a lot for Russell Wilson. They were supposed to compete. They were a dark horse team last year. Now they hired a boneheaded coach in Nathaniel Hackett. And that's the one thing I'll defend Sean Payton on is nothing he said about Nathaniel Hackett wasn't true. Was it mean? Sure. But nothing he said wasn't true, and it wasn't anything that any Denver Bronco fan couldn't see. But 6-5, okay. DeMeco Ryans has the Texans at 6-5. They were one of the worst teams in the league last year. They were worse than Denver. Now it's a completely different roster, so I can acknowledge that. The Colts are 6-5 with their backup quarterback with Shane Steichen. So those are 2 more guys on their first year with their new team, and they got their squad at 6-5. So good job winning 5 straight, but let's not ignore that they started out 1-5 as well, and it was a dumpster fire. I always get a kick out of that with NFL teams. Sometimes it's almost like it's better to start out 0-5 and then go 5-5 instead of, win week 1, lose week 2, win week 1, lose week 2. It's almost like you get credit for that. Why? You're part of the reason for the start. You talked all that crap and you started out 1-5. The other thing that's getting mentioned about Sean Payton is the Russell Wilson turnaround. Is it really that impressive? It's not like Russell Wilson is in the MVP conversation. He's playing some good ball. He's being very efficient. Top 5 in QBR, top 5 in rating, I think. But it's not like he's doing what Brian Dable did 2 years ago and making it to the playoffs with Daniel Jones. I mean, Russell Wilson is playing competent football. Now, last year he looked lost. He looked terrible. But before that season, they gave up a hell of a lot of draft equity to acquire him. I mean, they gave up damn near max draft equity to acquire Russell Wilson. And not too many people were criticizing it initially. So like this revival of Russell Wilson, I mean, it's not like he took Brock Osweiler to the playoffs or something like that, which I've minimized that a B.O.B. I mean, he had a probably Hall of Fame caliber quarterback, and he's playing decent football, and they're 6-5. Happens all the time in the NFL. I just mentioned two coaches that are 6-5. Mike Tomlin 7-4 with Pickett. The Broncos are 7-4. Kevin Stefanski has them doing their thing. So 6-5, and there's some like Russell Wilson turnaround. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but is it really that impressive? I mean, I really don't. I don't know how impressive that really is. And then you hear about the Sean Payton resume, and I don't want to disrespect what he did for the Saints. And that was I think that was one of the, if you weren't a Colts fan, everybody was cheering for the Saints in that Super Bowl. So I don't want to take away from how great of a moment that was. But I do think that the Sean Payton, like the biggest praises that we get are, number one, that he won a Super Bowl. Awesome. And it was a magical Super Bowl. It was a great Super Bowl. I was very happy for the city of New Orleans. One of the best cities in the United States, one of the most fun places to go. I've had many a nights on bourbon. He won a Super Bowl. A lot of coaches have won a Super Bowl and hung their hat on that for a long time. John Gruden got another job because he won a Super Bowl. Is it hard to do? Is Sean Payton going to be a Hall of Famer? Sure, but he won a Super Bowl in New Orleans. Awesome. The work he did with Drew Brees. This is another big Sean Payton praise. We need to start looking at Drew Brees like we do Tom Brady when it comes to Belichick. And I don't minimize what Belichick has done. It did with Brady as much as a lot of people do. But we need to start realizing that Drew Brees is an all-time great. Drew Brees was already a Pro Bowl. He had already been to a Pro Bowl as an NFL quarterback before Sean Payton ever coached him in New Orleans. The shoulder was effed up. The shoulder ended up getting fixed. But this notion that Drew Brees was just some pipsqueak worthless moron that didn't know what he was doing, and Sean Payton went there and worked with him. We need to start maybe looking at this as if, and I think as time goes on in this Denver tenure, we probably will, but we need to start looking at this and maybe acknowledging that Drew Brees was pretty damn good. And Sean Payton was lucky to have Drew Brees. Were they a perfect mix? Yes. Is Drew Brees going to go to Canton? Is Sean Payton going to go to Canton? Yes. Do they deserve it? Yes. Same thing with Bill Belichick and Brady. But come on. Drew Brees was not like some joke. I think the greatness of Drew Brees might have been higher than the greatness of Sean Payton. And then you hear, like, throughout this hiring process, well, Sean Payton went 9-8 the season after Drew Brees. Okay, Brian Dable won a playoff game with Daniel Jones. That happens every year. You see average teams go 9-8 and compete in the playoffs. Let's break down what the NFC South looked like. 9-8 without Brees, that's cool. Let's see how that would have lasted. I don't know that things would be that much different in New Orleans. Also in New Orleans, talk about all Sean Payton's accomplishments, and it's a very good resume. All the division titles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 division titles. Actually 4, 5, 6, 7 division titles. There was a 7-9 season. There was an 8-8 season. There were 3 straight 7-9 seasons from 2014 to 2016. So there were some rough times as well. I think Sean Payton's overrated. I think Drew Brees is the greatest thing that was going on in New Orleans. And whatever you want to say, I will see him versus DeMeco Ryans on Sunday. Denver wanted to hire DeMeco Ryans more so than Sean Payton, and I think he's an overrated coach. We'll get to see what he's got on Sunday, and I am just glad that I don't have to cover his ass. It is the Locker Room, #1 source on Texans daily digital content. Let me re-say that. I am glad I don't have to cover his overrated ass. Subscribe, like, ride along. It is the Locker Room. Appreciate you for coming through. Sure, some people disagree on that. That's fine. That's the beauty of this thing. It is hump day. We're going to hear from Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator of the Texans today. We're going to hear from CJ Stroud. We'll hear from Bobby tomorrow. We'll hear from CJ today. We'll hear from an exclusive interview with the player off the field tomorrow. Appreciate you. Comes to this Texan stuff. We're all in it together. Sean Payton overrated. Thank God for DeMeco.
We got taste for days, opinions to give. We got takeaways. If it's up, then it's up. We #1. You don't need to try your luck. Locker Room, yeah, we in the